Thank you for joining me for this seminar on how to raise your self-esteem. Self-esteem impacts your relationships with others, your relationship with yourself. It affects self-care, boundaries, and communication, and how you value your needs, thoughts, and feelings, and how you communicate them. It determines the way you allow others to talk to you. It's said that you allow others to abuse you a little less than you abuse yourself. Self-esteem is crucial to effective parenting. As a parent, if your self-esteem is low, it inevitably influences your parenting and actions, and children learn most by imitation of parental behavior. Your destiny, relationships, and success or failure largely reflect your thoughts and your self-esteem. Self-esteem is an evaluation of yourself. It's how you see yourself and what you think about yourself. In this way, it differs from a feeling like shame. Self-esteem is learned in childhood if it's either good self-esteem or if you have a low opinion of yourself. You may think well of yourself and your competence in some areas, but not in others. And your estimation may fluctuate with illness, loss of a job, and just life's ups and downs. However, if you have good self-esteem, you return to feeling good about yourself. You won't blame yourself, nor take others' opinions or what fate throws your way personally. You'll think you're okay, despite losses, ill health, mistakes, and rejection. Most people base their worth upon other esteem. They seek approval and validation from others, and unless they receive it, their opinion of themselves isn't very high. But true self-esteem isn't based on what others think of you. It's not determined by comparison to others or approval from others. It's based on your inner thoughts about yourself, since it's self-esteem. If it's healthy self-esteem, it's realistic. It's a positive self-concept. Low self-esteem should be taken seriously. It's more common than you think. 1 out of every 4 adults suffered from a psychological disorder in any given year. The majority suffer from low self-esteem, and it's an underlying factor in many conditions, including addiction and depression, and of course, codependency. This translates to almost 58 million people in the United States and nearly 8 million in Canada. A poor self-image puts people at risk for eating disorders, depression, suicide, antisocial behavior, spousal abuse, poor performance on the job. It leads to relationship problems, even divorce. But you can learn to overcome self-defeating behavior and impaired self-esteem with counseling and support because, as I said, self-esteem is learned. Some of the symptoms of good self-esteem versus low self-esteem is people with high self-esteem know that they're okay. I call this healthy self-esteem. They know that they have value and that they matter. You like yourself. You feel competent, and you trust yourself. Your focus is internal. You make decisions from your experience and information, but you're not controlled by others' opinions or others' approval. You basically like yourself and are able to act with integrity because you trust yourself. You're driven from your own values and your own experience. You honor yourself, and you expect others to honor you too, with respect. You're responsible for yourself and your feelings and your thoughts. You don't blame others. You actually have more compassion for others. You're able to receive compliments and praise, accept attention. You don't shy away from that, like someone with impaired or low self-esteem. You have compassion for yourself. You accept yourself. Someone with impaired self-esteem will have a different set of symptoms. They may be quitting, procrastinating, blaming others. They doubt themselves and feel indecisive. They are often judging themselves, comparing themselves to others, asking others' opinion, unsure of themselves, indecisive. They may never feel that they're enough. That's a major symptom. So they're constantly trying to improve themselves and never satisfied. They might be perfectionist. They discount their wants and needs and feelings and put other people first on a consistent basis. They may be envious of others because they feel bad about themselves. They may be driven to success or act in an arrogant or defensive manner because it's hard for them to accept any kind of criticism because they themselves are so critical. They will try to control other people's feelings so that they will be reflected back in a positive way because their self-esteem and worth is dependent on what other people think and feel, so they therefore have to control other people. I like the term impaired self-esteem because some people who have unrealistically high self-esteem, for instance, many narcissists, will score well on a self-survey of self-esteem, but their opinion of themselves is inflated. It doesn't really reflect reality. So I use the term impaired self-esteem so that it's not too high and inflated or too unrealistically low. People with impaired self-esteem basically don't like themselves. They think, I can't do that. They don't trust themselves. They trust other people more than themselves. They don't know what to do. As I said, they may procrastinate. They don't like too much attention. They may not know what they want. And they don't value their needs and their feelings, but put others ahead of their own. Clues that you may have impaired self-esteem is that you misperceive statements by other people. You're hypersensitive to criticism or very defensive. You have anxiety about being liked and approved. You might be trying to please others, even when you don't want to, in order that they will like you and approve of you. As I said, there's indecisiveness, procrastination, because people with impaired self-esteem are afraid of making mistakes or looking bad. They will take things personally. If their partner is in a bad mood, they'll immediately think they did something wrong and try to find out or over-apologize. They're often in relationships where they're either a victim of abuse or an abuser. They may participate in self-destructive behavior and then feel ashamed. This is the way that it brings out shame that's underneath. Or they constantly are pushing themselves to achieve. They overdo at work or overgive a relationship. They're often idealizing others who they think are better than themselves because they think less of themselves. So they put others higher than themselves and may be attracted to someone who they think is better than them. All of this self-criticism, procrastination, comparing self to others can lead to depression because they're living in a state of anxiety, not feeling good about themselves, not being able to meet their needs, and self-judging, living with someone that's criticizing themselves. Some of the beliefs that go along, often unconscious, with impaired self-esteem is that I'm a failure. I don't deserve to be happy. If people knew my thoughts, they would see that I'm a bad person. Or I don't deserve the promotion I got. If people only knew, they feel like they're a phony, that basically they're defective or flawed. They're not enough. You might not know that you believe this, but if what you do is never enough, or never perfect enough, that may be a clue that really you believe that you are not enough. Underneath, people with low self-esteem have a belief that they are unlovable. They may even hate themselves. And some got the message that they shouldn't have been born. The cause of low self-esteem begins in childhood. Your parents have the biggest influence on you. Healthy parenting communicates to a child that he or she is uniquely wanted by both parents. It's not enough that one parent is loving. They let their child know that they each value him or her and want a mutual relationship. They value and respect each child's individuality. They don't just praise a child for compliance or doing what the parent wants, but they let the child know that who they are is respected and valued. And this is communicated through accurate empathy, reflecting back a child's thoughts, feelings, meeting their needs. This is what builds an individual psychological existence and creates a healthy self and healthy self-esteem. In a dysfunctional family system, self-esteem is not generated. In fact, can teach children to have low self-esteem. Typical of a dysfunctional family system is dysfunctional communication, poor boundaries, a child's individual rights, body, their beliefs, their thoughts, their feelings are not respected. They may be criticized, shamed, given mixed messages. It's not safe to express the truth. Discipline may be unfair, and the children feel that it's not safe to be who they are. They might even learn to distrust their parents. Oftentimes, there's denial. There's rules, what we don't talk about. So children learn to distrust their perceptions. Because reality is distorted, they learn not to trust themselves. Parents may be authoritarian, stifling any dissent. Rules can be rigid, inconsistent, unpredictable. So children walk on eggshells. They never know when they're going to be punished. They don't feel safe, and they hold inside hurt and resentment. They start to feel more alone and hide what they really feel. Of course, if there's any abuse, that violates a child's feeling of safety, feeling loved. Many parents have good intentions. They might not be abusive, but still they can be irritable or indifferent if they are overstressed because of financial needs or just too many children or marital problems. Some well-meaning parents pressure their children to do more and achieve. This sends a message that who they are is not enough. They constantly have to be performing to be accepted. Another thing that parents often do is make global attributions. So instead of saying you need to do your homework on time, they might say that you are lazy. They're not just critical, but they're shaming their child or saying you're a bad girl or a bad boy. That's a global attribution rather than addressing specific behavior, and it undermines a child's sense of self and self-esteem. Comparing children to each other, comparing your child to how you were when you were a child, comparing a child to a neighbor child or playmate. Anything that compares one child to another undermines self-worth. Studies have even shown that too much praise or too little praise or alternating praise and criticism can be harmful. So a child has to know that what they're doing is enough, and when they do well, to be told so. But they won't trust you if you're always praising them because they know when they make mistakes. Some parents try to compensate for the poor parenting they had as a child, so they may become over-involved. This breeds dependency by their children. They don't learn to trust themselves. Some parents are overprotective because they were abused or neglected as a child, and their own children become fearful. Some parents overcorrect in trying to do the right thing, and this also breeds self-doubt. Parents might try to manipulate their children into doing the right thing or doing what they want, rather than being direct. Low self-esteem can also come from bullying at school or sibling abuse and teasing, and the child is not protected by their parents. Sibling abuse can account for trauma that isn't always addressed by therapists. In order to cope in a dysfunctional family system, children create an ideal image of how they should be. The underlying belief is if they are this perfect ideal self, they will be loved, they will be safe, they will have a feeling of power and worth. What this ideal is will vary from child to child depending on their environment and their personality and their gender. Some children might think if I'm always good, if I'm always loving, or if I'm very powerful, like a superhero, and then I won't be hurt. They create this ideal self in order to survive in the family. And then they strive to become their ideal. And the more a child tries to be their ideal, the further they become from who they really are. Religion and culture also play a role in determining standards and values and ideals by which we evaluate ourselves. There are different standards for men and women culturally. Generally, men are expected to show strength and courage, sexual prowess, to control their feelings, and be good providers. Women are more sensitive to their body size and their appearance. There's an expectation about being a good mother or being modest. When we set up this ideal self, we're always failing because it is an ideal, it's unrealistic. Whether or not you're aware of it, you have an inner critic. Everyone does. Self-criticism is a major contributor to low self-esteem. Your inner critic can rob you of happiness, make you ill, and ruin your life. Your inner critic starts criticizing you for failing to meet these ideals, to say you're falling short, you made mistakes, you were weak, you cried, or you weren't nice enough, you weren't giving enough, you're selfish. The critic is also frequently the voice of a critical parent. Children internalize their voices. You might hear how they talk to their action figures, their dolls, their pet, and you can hear the voice of the parent in the child's voice. And this way they're internalizing the parental voice that lives with them in adulthood, sometimes long after the parent is no longer on this earth, and they're plagued by that inner critic. Here is a diagram of the self divided. So the real self is at the core, but on the outside of the real self is that critic and the shame-based critical self. I call it the devalued self, the part of you that feels not enough, that's always listening to the critics. A well-known psychiatrist in the 40s coined the term the tyranny of the shoulds. And this ideal self that you see this in the white around the figure compensates for feeling inadequate or unlovable, the devalued self. The child is always striving to achieve or to be that ideal, whether it's beautiful, successful, all-loving, all-powerful, and it further reinforces shame and alienates the true self. The persona is the self that you show to the world. It might be the codependent self. It's a false self. Codependents are typically very nice. Codependents might also be abusive, but it hides what they're really feeling. There are three voices typically that people have. I call it the tyrannical trio, disgusting, codependency for dummies. It's the critic, which I mentioned, that really dislikes the real self. It criticizes you for any feelings that it deems are negative. These are commonly feelings that have been shamed in your family, with messages that don't be afraid, don't raise your voice, or don't cry, are shaming messages. And then there's the perfectionist, keeps seeking to become the ideal, the impossible ideal self. It might tell you to always be happy and hide your unhappiness. And then there's the pusher that pushes you to do more, to strive to improve, to perform, that underneath thinks, I'm not good enough. I am not enough. I always have to do more, work harder, never relax, and just enjoy. So the critic and all of these beliefs of unworthiness lead to chronic anxiety and fear. I call it shame anxiety, which is discussed more in Conquering Shame and Codependency. It's the fear of being judged. But often the judge is internal. The thought of, what if I'm not liked? People might reject me. What if I'm abandoned? What if I get hurt? What if I fail? This is all due to low self-esteem and underlying shame. Some people are even unconsciously afraid of succeeding. There may be messages that they got in their childhood that make succeeding scary. Shame and low self-esteem set up a negative feedback loop. Self-criticism leads to self-doubt and anxiety. And then that leads to inertia. People can't make decisions. They can't act. They can't follow their goals. They're ambivalent all the time. They procrastinate. They're undecisive. And this self-doubt and self-criticism then leads to depression. And then they blame themselves for not meeting their goals, not succeeding, for being depressed. And this negative feedback loop increases. You can create a new self-image. You don't have to become your negative beliefs. Even though they were formed in childhood, they were learned. They were false messages that you got. And with some work, you can change those beliefs and messages. So some of the goals in raising your self-esteem would be to change your negative self-talk into positive, encouraging self-talk. And begin to express yourself instead of hiding yourself. Keeping commitments to yourself. Many people don't realize that they're the first ones to abandon themselves. To take reasonable risks, including setting limits. That means that you won't accept abuse, because the more you do, the more it reinforces your low self-esteem. An abusive relationship can really damage your self-esteem. But first, you have to change the abusive relationship with yourself, because you can leave that relationship and continue to be self-critical and blame and shame yourself, and you'll end up in another relationship that's similar until you feel worthy of being loved. One of the steps in healing is being able to identify and meet your needs, which I'll talk more about, love and forgive yourself, and pursuing your goals, your greater goals. So let's look at the first step, is building self-awareness. I always recommend that people make a list of their negative self-talk and write it down daily. You can even wear a rubber band and snap yourself every time that you say something negative yourself. And that would include your shoulds, that tyranny of the shoulds. Take an inventory of what you dislike about yourself. Write down your negative beliefs. Draw a picture of the critic. What would it look like? It might be a caricature. Even if you make a stick figure, it doesn't matter. And then interview that critic. Ask questions with your dominant hand, which is usually your right, and then have the critic answer with your left hand, or your non-dominant hand. And whenever you are in a down mood, Start to think back about what your negative thoughts were. Maybe something happened the day before, and you think you made mistakes, or you don't like how you came across to someone. You were judging yourself after some encounter with someone, and this, you might not even realize that this has been sitting on you, kind of in your unconscious, and then you end up waking up in a bad mood. Find out who the critic reminds you of. What is the voice and tone? Does it sound male, female? Is it harsh? Is it more like a school teacher that's nagging and blaming? Or is it more like a terrorist? The next step is to befriend your critic. My ebook, 10 Steps to Self-Esteem, has 10 steps to deal with self-criticism. Each of the 10 steps are the first 10 letters of the alphabet. The second one is befriend the critic. So dialogue, as I said, with your critic. Be respectful. Find out who the critic learned from and what does it really feel about you. What is its worst fear? For example, it may be criticizing how you look so you won't be rejected by other people. It wants you to lose weight, change your hair or something so that you'll be more attractive. Find out the critic's motive. Go through each flaw and find out what is the critic's motive and plan. You may find out that the critic really has positive intentions. Conduct the same type of interview for your pusher and perfectionist. Confront your critic. So now interview your devalued self, the part of you that listens to criticisms all day long. How does it feel? Weighted down? Does it feel worthless? Is it unhappy? Feel hopeless? It's important that you realize consciously the devastation that your critic causes you, and look for double binds that your critic puts you in. For instance, it may tell you to stay later and work harder on your job, but also criticize you for not being home with your children. You can't do two things at once or be in two places at the same time. So when you start to see that the critic is putting you in double binds, you realize that the critic is going to constantly criticize you no matter what. Tune out that voice. Often the critic says things that are paradoxical, like, you shouldn't judge. Well, that's a judgment. So the critic is judging and telling you not to judge at the same time. Start to challenge the truth of the critic's beliefs and standards. Is it driven by standards that were of your parents' generation, or the community or church you grew up in, versus what you believe today? Are the beliefs false? For instance, if you get a promotion, that then you'll be happy. Maybe you look around and see other people with more money or that promotion and they're not happy. Or that if you lose weight, that then you'll be loved. Well, there are many people that are overweight that are very happily married and loved by many people. So challenge the beliefs that are underpinning the critic's criticism so you don't have to adopt everything the critic says. And talk back to your critic. When you find out, well, maybe that was one of your parents' beliefs, tell it to cut it out. And then ask yourself, is this strategy working? Is it really helping you? Or is it hurting you? For instance, if your critic is trying to make you look perfect before you go to a job interview or before you go on a date, it might make you less self-confident and therefore do poorly on the interview, appear anxious on your date so that you're not comfortable and neither is your date. Analyze the costs and benefits that the critic is contributing to your self-esteem. You might find out that it's really harmful. The next step, begin to reform your critic into a positive coach. And you can do this by using humor to disarm the critic or find alternate ways to meet the same goals. For instance, encouraging yourself might go much further to meeting your goals than criticism. And look for small signs of progress. Reward yourself. Make a list of encouraging statements. Use affirmations. Compliment yourself. The unconscious does not distinguish compliments by you or compliments by other people. It's very concrete. So you don't have to wait for someone else to compliment you. You can do it for yourself. Make a list of compliments that other people give you. So you can read it when you feel down or think that nobody appreciates you or likes you. Now, when you're making affirmations, first of all, they have to be something that you believe. If you don't believe them, they're not going to work because your unconscious knows the truth. And then you never use negative statements. So you don't say what you don't want. You say what you do want, and you say it as if it's happening in the present time. You can write yourself a love letter. Start to visualize yourself doing what you want to do. Visualize yourself achieving certain goals, doing well on the interview, being relaxed and comfortable at an important meeting or conversation. See yourself accomplishing challenges that you have. Create a rhyming jingle of one of your affirmations. The brain really likes things that are musical and that rhyme. And this way you can repeat it to yourself. This is why commercials use jingles, so people remember them and it creates a deep impression. So you're going to start to change this negative feedback loop into a positive feedback loop. So you're starting with encouragement. Again, look for small signs of progress. If you're making improvement, compare yourself to where you were 6 months ago. Take action that benefits you, positive action. That builds confidence. It might be taking a risk. That builds self-esteem. It enables you to take more risks, builds more confidence. Beyond how you talk to yourself, it's very important that you honor yourself. So that includes not only what you say to yourself, but how you value your wants, your feelings, your needs, your standards and principles. Getting to know them. This is difficult for many people when they've denied them due to their childhood. I have a whole chapter in Codependency for Dummies on getting to know yourself. That's the first step, is knowing yourself. And that in itself builds self-esteem. And then honoring your feelings, allowing them, not thinking that you shouldn't have them or pretending not to have them. Be sure that you're consistent with your values. Fulfill your wants. This is hard for many codependents. They don't know what they want. They don't make it happen. They expect someone else to make them happy. And then what's very important is honoring your needs, finding out what they are, and then figuring out how you're going to meet them. It's also important to forgive yourself. You will make mistakes. That's part of being human. Only a perfectionist thinks they shouldn't make mistakes. That means that they won't allow themselves to be human. Figure out what you feel guilty about. Understand what your motives were. If you owe an amends to somebody, do that. But number one, forgive yourself. I wrote an ebook called Freedom from Guilt and Blame that lays out many steps. It's an entire workbook on self-forgiveness and making amends to others. And people have found that very valuable. I also have a blog on self-forgiveness. Number 8, become self-responsible. When you look to others to make you happy, you will eventually be disappointed, because being an adult means being responsible for yourself. You're not a victim of other people. So it means taking responsibility, as I said, for your feelings, your wants, your actions, and doing esteemable acts, doing things that make you feel good about yourself. It might mean cleaning your house, getting your car fixed, having good food, and making healthy meals for yourself. It might mean helping someone, doing things that make you proud, Leaving things undone eats away at you. Procrastinating undermines your self-esteem. So when you brush things under the rug, you might think that you're not thinking about them, but they undermine your self-esteem at an unconscious level. So as I said, keep commitments to yourself. Try to be self-supporting if you can. I mean financially too. That'll make you feel good about yourself. A simple formula is when you meet your needs, you feel good. When you ignore your needs, you feel bad. Discovering what your needs are and how to meet them is very important to your happiness and to your self-esteem. Assertiveness is key because it's so tied to self-esteem. When you're not assertive, people can judge that you have low self-esteem. And when you are assertive, people immediately realize that you have high self-esteem. And assertiveness is learned too, and again, it's learned in your family of origin. Generally, in dysfunctional families, communication is dysfunctional too. But you can learn to be assertive, and that will raise your self-esteem. Assertiveness includes communication that is clear, that is concise and to the point, that's direct, that is congruent, that it expresses your truth. You don't say one thing and mean something else. That is courteous, and that it asserts you that you take ownership. So you're taking positions, you're expressing your feelings, your wants, your needs, and assertiveness includes listening. Because if you don't listen, you're not a good communicator. It's so important to your self-esteem and to recovery that I wrote an ebook, How to Speak Your Mind, Become Assertive and Set Limits. I also produced a webinar called How to Be Assertive, and you can find them both on my website. Non-assertive communication is often dishonest, it's evasive, it might be manipulative, giving advice to others, telling others what they should do. So that's your inner critic now projected onto other people. It can include verbal abuse and blaming. It won't include I statements because the speaker is not asserting themselves. People who are non-assertive don't have good boundaries. They have trouble saying no. As I said, they're often people pleasers. Instead of taking a position or making a statement, they'll ask a question, or they over-apologize, or make long explanations and justifications, rather than being succinct to the point. And finally, your self-esteem will be protected when you set boundaries. Think of setting boundaries as a graduate level of assertiveness. First you learn to be assertive, and then you learn to take risks and how to set boundaries. You have to know what you'll accept and what you won't. What is your bottom line? What is non-negotiable, and how to communicate it in an effective, calm, but firm and courteous manner. These are all described in my webinar on assertiveness and my ebook. Self-esteem in action is self-empowerment. So as you're now focusing more on you, and your locus of control is not so much other esteem and other people, you begin to make your own decisions. You discover your passions, you take reasonable risks, you start pursuing your goals, and this even further develops your self-esteem. And finally, learning to love yourself. People used to tell me, you're going to have to learn to love yourself, and I hated hearing that because I had no idea what that meant. Well, it includes all the things I've talked about. Honoring yourself, not abandoning yourself, being gentle with yourself, having compassion and acceptance for yourself, listening to what you're feeling and honoring your feelings. I have 3 exercises for self-love, confidence, and relaxation, and people have told me they're very helpful, so you can listen to that on my YouTube channel. Learning self-compassion includes nurturing, and if you didn't have a nurturing parent, you have to learn how to nurture yourself as an adult. So I help people to visualize and dialogue with their inner child. That vulnerable child part of you still exists, even though you may be 50 years old. Tap into that vulnerable, sometimes frightened child and get to know him or her. And when you're feeling discomfort, meet your needs. That's part of nurturing yourself. Play is very important too. Having some healthy pleasures. Learning to name your feelings and writing in your journal. That's part of honoring your feelings. You'll get to know yourself better that way. There are many self-soothing techniques, some of which are in my blog, 10 Tips to Self-Love, such as meditation, wrapping yourself in a blanket, singing, playing with an animal or a child, expressing your creativity. Anything that is fun for that child part of you. It might be collecting seashells on the beach, or collecting rocks, making a collage, watching comedy shows, dancing. It's important to have a network in your recovery. That might include a therapist, friends, or a sponsor in a 12-step program. It's hard to make these changes on your own because you're used to your own negative beliefs and self-talk. So what does recovery look like? It means that you're in present time. You're no longer reacting to beliefs and messages from the past or trauma from the past that's triggered in the present. You're no longer pretending to be someone who you're not. You're behaving in an authentic manner. You're acting independently, autonomously. You can feel comfortable alone, and you're capable of intimacy. You don't feel desperate to be in a relationship, nor do you have walls up to prevent intimacy. The expression of your values, how you behave, are congruent with what you're feeling on the inside. They're congruent with your values. You're not two-faced. So if you wanted to sum things up into 4 steps, act to meet your needs, be authentic, cultivate good thoughts about yourself, and do what you really want. A shorthand diagram of recovery might be to know yourself, and that builds self-esteem. And then you take reasonable risks, and then you know yourself differently. And that builds more courage and more self-esteem and more confidence. You can find more information on my website, whatiscodependency.com or darlenelancer.com. And you can get 14 tips to letting go if you join my mailing list. And I post daily at facebook.com, Codependency Recovery. I also blog every month. You could subscribe to my blog on my website. I also post my blog on Google+, post daily on Twitter and on LinkedIn. My paperback books are available at Amazon and in stores, Conquering Shame and Codependency and Codependency for Dummies. And additionally, I have several ebooks. I've mentioned a few. How to Speak Your Mind, Become Assertive and Set Limits, 10 Steps to Self-Esteem, Codependency Daily Reflections, and Spiritual Transformation in the 12 Steps. I also have an ebook on dealing with a narcissist, and as I mentioned, another one, Freedom from Guilt and Blame, Finding Self-Forgiveness. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. Thank you.